Welcome to another installment of the Stones' most overlooked albums. In previous videos, we explored a bunch of albums that are generally overlooked by most fans. I highlighted albums like Between the Buttons, Goat's Head Soup, and Bridges to Babylon. I thought I had focused on all the albums I needed to for this series, but I realized that there was one more album that absolutely needed mentioning.
They're all good.
After visiting this album again in the last few months, an argument could be made that this is the band's most overlooked album ever, even to Stones fans. So, to commemorate the album's 40th anniversary, all this month I'll be shining a light on one of the Stones' most exciting albums, Undercover.
Huh?
It can be super easy to forget about Undercover, but frankly, this album, along with other 80s era Stones albums, have been way overhated by a certain group of fans over the years. Sure, the album itself represents a shaky period for the band, but this album actually has a lot to say. It takes a lot of risks, and the album gets big points from me for that. Here's some context to totally understand where this album came from. The 80s were off to a great start for the Stones. They were riding high after the success of their latest hit, Start Me Up, on their critically acclaimed album, Tattoo You. They had just ended the 81 and 82 tour across the US and Europe, and also had put out the much-celebrated concert film, Let's Spend the Night Together. But as they headed into sessions for Undercover, Jagger and Richards were at odds on where exactly to bring the Stones next. Recording sessions were tense, according to producer Chris Kimsey. It got difficult later because you had to take sides. I would be working maybe 18 hours a day because on one side you've got Mick coming in while doing the overdub parts when we were in New York. Mick would come in from about 1 to 7 p.m., and Keith would come in from midnight to 6 a.m. So you could imagine, that was ridiculous. That really got crazy, trying to be in both camps. I think at the end of the day, I definitely favored being with the musicians rather than the lead vocalist, the businessman. So it's no secret that this album has already, from the get-go, already a clash of ideas between Mick and Keith. And, can you blame them? I mean, if you look at the context of this is a very crucial moment for the band. I mean, the question for the band is, do we double down on our classic sound or do we continue to push forward? This is a new decade now, and let's keep in mind, this is 1983. Tattoo You came out in 81. But Tattoo You was basically an album of leftover songs from older sessions going way back to kind of Goat's Head Soup days and maybe even older. So Tattoo You isn't necessarily a product of its time. And people said that it was a kind of classic return to form kind of album, a comeback sound. But really, how can it be anything but that when the songs came from previous sessions? So it was always going to be a retro sound because it came from retro days. So Tattoo You isn't necessarily an album that represents the Stones in 1981 by any means. The great author Bill Janovitz, who wrote this great book, Rock Soft, 50 Tracks That Tell the Story of the Rolling Stones, he writes that this album is a product of overthinking. I mean, it's a fair statement to make, but to me, it has to be very calculating because it has to do something very tricky, which is how do we balance, our personality as a band and keeping our, centered while also competing and also being out there with everyone else who was out there on the charts. The album itself is co-produced by Chris Kimsey, who has worked with the Stones many times over the years up to this point as an engineer and in the studio with them, but this is one of the first times that he's worked with them in a producer capacity. I mean, look, to kick things off, we have the song Undercover of the Night, which I've spoken about this song before, but this is one of their best songs. I don't care what year you're talking about. This is a very powerful, significant track. It's primarily a Mick song that he primarily wrote after he was inspired by a William S. Burroughs novel called Cities of the Red Night. What's great about this track is that it has this combination of this, frivolous, one-dimensional kind of a dance track on the bottom. But on top of it, the lyrics are pretty dense, and it's about something that you wouldn't necessarily sing about in a pop song, which is the horrors and the terrible goings-on in South America during this time. Ronnie is sort of the MVP on this song along with Mick, because Ronnie is putting down some amazing leads throughout the track. And apparently Mick and Ronnie really, with the help of Charlie, kind of built the song from the ground up with very minimal writing from Keith, although he says he's on the track, but I can't really hear him anywhere. And in case you're wondering, that is a timpani in this recording. It's kind of funny that they were aware of the 80s drum sound being a very large sound. And while they knew that that wasn't necessarily going to be appropriate for them with the palette that they're working with, they kind of met in a middle ground by not going all the way with an electronic big drum sound dominating the song, but they would accent it with a timpani, which is a very, orchestral instrument that wouldn't necessarily be in a rock song, but it does add some size to the song, which is what probably they wanted, and it does add this extra element of drama into the song. It's not clear who's on timpani. It could be Charlie, but it hasn't really been confirmed who is specifically behind that instrument. It's not Bill Wyman on bass either. It's Robbie Shakespeare on bass, providing some very cool, great bass playing on this song. And it's really from the ground up a very special song. It's absolutely groovy and absolutely pulsating with a beat. I mean, how can you not move when you're listening to this song? And for that alone, that makes this a classic Stones song, because it grabs you by the hips. And not only that, but it also kind of gets you thinking. It's a very, it's not a song that easily goes down lyrically. It's some tough stuff going on there. So because of that tension, I can't help but listen and lean into it. And I don't know, if you want to dismiss it, it's there for dismissing, but if you take a look and listen to it and listen deeper, you can see that the song is actually a little bit more in the same vein as a lot of their political songs from the 60s. This could very well be an updated version of A Street Fighting Man, for example. So think of it like that. It's aesthetically coming from a different era, but at the heart of it, it's still the Stones. The great Sly Dunbar is here, adding some very cool electronic drum effects. But again, mind you, they're just there to complement and accent Charlie. Charlie is absolutely the center of this song. And these electronic drum elements really just are kind of sprinkled throughout the song just to give it a little bit more, there's a power to it. There's also a violence to the song. I mean, that's what the song is about. It's about these very dark, violent ideas. And the song is just filled to the brim with percussive elements. And as Keith has mentioned, that this album is really the most drummiest album, I think is how he said it. And it's true. It's a very percussive album. And this song in particular jam-packs a lot of percussive elements into one. And so just for that alone, production-wise, it's a very engaging production because of all these percussive parts moving. And really every instrument on this song is a drum. And it really adds to this pulsating rhythm to the song that, again, I don't know how you could not hear and feel this song when it comes on. I'm not going to go through all the songs, but some of the highs on this album really happen at the beginning of the album with this 3-song punch right at the very top. You've got Undercover of the Night, which is a classic in my opinion. And then you're off to She Was Hot, which is a fantastic hybrid of the old and the new. I love this track. I mean, from the moment it starts, you're off and going with this very obvious throwback to a Chuck Berry vibe. Keith rips it off into a great little Chuck Berry intro, and Mick comes in with a fabulous vocal delivery, which is so syncopated, so Chuck Berry, and just so fun to listen to and fun to sing if you actually sing along with him. But I admit the choruses are strange. The synths and the keys that are on here, which are played by Chuck Leavell, they can be a little bit jarring. You're like, what the hell? But at the end of the day, you realize that it's this combination of flavors that actually does work. The bright and sweetness of the Chuck Berry verses kind of do clash with the choruses, which are kind of dark and, much more loopy, dreamy sounding. But at the same time, in a way, they kind of both work very well on their own, and it's questionable if they actually work together, but I think it does. It does create some kind of friction and tension, which the song needs, because otherwise it would have been this others just like another, like, I don't know, Silver Train or something, where it's just like, oh, it's just another Chuck Berry song, which is cool, but this adds a different element. And again, it's this hybrid of the old and the new. Again, at the root of it, it's a very Stones track. It's not a huge departure by any means. So if people are still feeling shaky, even this second song into the album, I think it's all in your head, because if you actually, again, pick it apart and do the math, it's still a Stones album, and they're very much in this album. And 2 songs in, to me, I think we're off to a great start. If you want to hear something very interesting, I would track down the extended version of She Was Hot that they released. I'm not sure where they put this out, but there's like a 6-minute version that extends the outro into this jam that you wouldn't expect to come out of a song like this. But it's there and it's fun. I'm going to link it in the description and in the comments below so you can check it out. And just like so many things on this album, there are many things to enjoy in the production. It's just this cornucopia of wonderful stuff going on if you actually search and look for everything around you that's happening. And in this song, there's a lot of cool stuff. Great guitar work by Keith. Charlie sounds great. And I love all the keys on this track. It's Chuck Leavell on the electric piano that comes in the verses. Very percussive and very tasteful. And then you've got Ian Stewart in all of his boogie-woogie glory coming out right after the first verse or so, and he's playing straight through on those verses, and it's just like, yeah, there they are. There's that sound. Again, the Stones are there. And then another high on the album comes in track 3. Like I said, this is a 3-song punch right at the very top of this album with the song Tie You Up. And again, this for me is an irresistible track. There's hardly any 80s elements that are offensive on this track, if at all. It's very much the core Stones right there in the middle of the song. And listen to the lyrics. I mean, this is some dirty stuff. Again, classic Stones, where it's that dark, dirty, pushing the envelope Stones. This is them again here, but amped up to the max. This is kind of R-rated Stones at this point here in this song. So Keith is just cooking with those great riffs. Very subtle, but very effective. Ronnie on bass on this track, and also a great guitar solo with the whammy effect on there as well. To me, the band is cooking. I mean, everyone sounds great on this one. And to me, this could have easily been on Tattoo You. It has that element of a band vibe, just like what that album is. It's very natural and live sounding. So again, I don't see the problem. And you've got another highlight with Too Much Blood, which to me is another super cool track, because again, it's very cool to hear the Stones in these new spaces. And what do they do with different contributions from other people? And this album is filled with other contributions from Robbie Shakespeare, Sly Dunbar. In this case, on this song, their road manager picks up a guitar and joins them to add some flavors to this song. Jim Barber adds some great texture with these kind of scratchy guitar elements that I absolutely love. I'm getting little shades and hints of Talking Heads a little bit, but this was, of course, popular in a lot of music during the time. And I think it's very cool to hear the band this way. I don't hear much of Keith on this one. Wyman sounds amazing on this track, and many tracks on this album, it's Wyman and Watts laying it down like they always do, and it's so cool to hear them adjusting themselves to these new songs and these new sounds. Mick is actually singing about some very interesting ideas about all the violence that he sees on TV. It's just too much blood, and again, not exactly a topic you'd want to sing about, in a pop song like this or a rock song. So it's an interesting premise at the very top, and underneath it, you've got a very danceable song. Much has been said about Mick's rapping in this song, which I guess could be rapping. I don't know. It's just him talking through certain elements. And again, it's a very dark song. Right when you think this album couldn't be any darker, this song comes on. I can't really speak on what exactly is going on here, but some very disturbing visuals here that's based on some real true crime things that have happened that Mick picked up on. The Stones have always been known to make you uncomfortable, make people go, oh God, what is that about? You know, in terms of content or in sound, and here they are still doing it. Like I said earlier, the album itself packs a punch, but is it perfect? No. I mentioned already some of my favorite moments of the album, which happen at the very, very top of the album. But there are some other wobbly spots in the album, like take songs like Wanna Hold You or Pretty Beat Up. I mean, those two songs in particular for me just don't fit on the album. As you get to the end of the album, you're kind of in more familiar territory. This is sort of more nuts and bolts Stones, and all the frills and all the effects that have been very prevalent up to this point have now kind of been stripped away, and you've got songs like All the Way Down and Too Tough and It Must Be Hell, where it's core Stones. Too Tough I quite enjoy. I think it's a very raw and organic and direct version of the Stones, at least on this album. With that being said, there is a wicked guitar solo by Ronnie Wood on this track. I've never heard him play this way before, but it's a very wild and kind of in-your-face solo that's very, very cool. For me, worth the price of admission alone just for this song. These are the more looser Stone songs. So really side A is much more, polished and much more precise. And side B is a little bit looser. So there's a lot of ways to kind of listen to this album. The album is far from perfect. In my opinion, the highs are so high that you kind of forgive any of the low moments that are going on in the album. Lyrically, it's one of Jagger's most challenging albums. I think the content going on from Undercover of the Night to Too Much Blood and some of the lyrics in All the Way Down. I mean, this is one of Jagger's most well-written albums. And I can see the only problem people could have about this is the sound of it. It's very 80s, but I mean, I don't know. The things that they were doing here Undercover set the stage for their longevity. This was them demonstrating their longevity. They see themselves as songwriters, not time capsules and elements in a museum that are supposed to be taking care of a particular sound or a particular idea, and that's what makes the Stones so interesting. Keith is the traditionalist, and his musical morals, so to speak, are grounded in a certain place, which is great. That's the element that we need in the Stones. But we also have someone like Mick who is trying to keep the boat afloat. And to me, that's what makes this album so special. It's a risky album for them because they are going into new waters. And I think for me, they succeed in a lot of ways. I walk away from this album and it still feels like a Stones album. So by no means does this feel like this is an outlier album that sticks out in the Stones catalog just because it's got electronic drums or some synths. I mean, frankly, give me a fucking break. I mean, we can take it, right? They're just keyboards. They're just synths. Don't forget, the album itself did very well. It hit number 4 on the charts. I mean, that's not something to sneeze at. And I'm sorry to say that the baggage that these 80s albums carry were really created by legacy fans who are sensitive to these kind of new directions. And so I ask that you listen to the album with some fresh ears and with the idea of fitting the context of this album and what the band had in front of them to accomplish. I think you can see that this album actually has a lot more weight to it than you think. The 80s elements are pretty limited. Charlie and Bill sound fantastic on a lot of the tracks, as well as Robbie Shakespeare and Sly Dunbar. It's a guitar fest, if you ask me. There are guitars everywhere on this album. So again, I ask, what's the problem? So with that being said, I think this qualifies as perhaps being the Stones' most overlooked album ever. So what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? I can't wait to read these comments. These are going to be fun. Make sure to comment below to give your thoughts on Undercover, and make sure to look out for the other videos coming in the next few weeks celebrating Undercover. I'm going to be devoting all of November to Undercover, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this month. So there's going to be a lot more cool things coming up. So make sure you hit subscribe so you follow along to get all the goodness coming up in the next few weeks. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Hangfire.